The rain had turned vicious by the time Ghara reached the crossroads inn, her swollen belly making each step a careful negotiation with the muddy ground beneath her boots. She pushed through the heavy oak door, water streaming from her travel-worn cloak, and felt the warmth of the common room wash over her like a blessing. The conversations died the moment she entered. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her, taking in her green skin, the tusks that curved slightly from her lower jaw, the unmistakable roundness of her pregnancy. She had grown used to the stares over the past months, but they still made her skin prickle with unease. The innkeeper, a broad-shouldered man with graying hair and a florid face, stood behind the bar polishing a tankard. His expression shifted from neutral curiosity to cold recognition in the span of a heartbeat. Ghara straightened her spine, refusing to let exhaustion show as she approached him. "I need a room for the night," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. "I can pay." She reached into her pouch and withdrew 3 silver coins, placing them carefully on the scarred wood of the bar. It was more than a room should cost, but she had learned that being an orc meant paying extra for the privilege of being tolerated. The innkeeper did not even glance at the coins. "We are full." "I can see empty tables," Ghara said, gesturing to the common room where at least half the seats sat vacant. "Surely you have space in the—" "I said we are full." His voice carried the weight of finality. "You will have to find accommodation elsewhere." "There is nowhere else," Ghara said, and she hated the pleading note that crept into her words. "The next town is 2 days' walk. I am tired and not my concern." The innkeeper turned his back to her, making a show of arranging bottles on the shelf behind him. "There is an old barn about a mile north on the eastern road. You might shelter there." Ghara felt the hot sting of tears threatening, but she blinked them back. She would not cry in front of these people, would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her hand instinctively moved to cradle her belly where she could feel the baby shifting. 7 months along, and still 2 weeks' journey from the coast where her cousin had offered her sanctuary. "Please," she tried one more time. "I only need a corner somewhere dry. I will not trouble anyone." "You are troubling me now." The innkeeper finally turned around, his face hard as granite. "Leave my establishment." The rain hammered against the windows as if to emphasize the cruelty of his words. Ghara looked around the room, hoping to find even a shred of sympathy in the faces staring back at her. She saw only suspicion, disgust, and carefully cultivated indifference. These were farming folk, tradesmen, travelers. People who might have known kindness once, but had locked it away where orcs were concerned. She gathered what remained of her dignity and turned toward the door. Her fingers had just closed around the handle when a voice spoke from the corner of the room. "She can have my room." The words were quiet, almost conversational, but they carried clearly through the sudden silence. Ghara turned to see a man rising from a table near the fireplace. He was tall but not imposing, with dark hair that fell to his collar and eyes the color of river stones. His face was weathered in a way that spoke of years spent outdoors, and there was a certain stillness about him that reminded Ghara of deep water. He crossed the room with measured steps, moving past her to place a brass key on the bar. "I paid for 3 nights," he said to the innkeeper. "She can have what remains." The innkeeper's face flushed an even deeper red. "Now see here, Rylan, my coin is as good as anyone's," the man called Rylan said, his tone remaining maddeningly calm. "And what I choose to do with the room I paid for is my business, not yours. I will not have an orc. You will not have anything to say about it since the room is paid for and I am the one who rented it." Rylan picked up the key and turned to face Ghara. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He held out the key. Room 7, top of the stairs, third door on the right. Ghara stared at the key as if it might bite her. I cannot take your room. I have somewhere else to stay. It was clearly a lie, but he delivered it with such straightforward conviction that it almost sounded true. The room will sit empty otherwise. I have money, Ghara said, reaching for her pouch again. Let me pay you, keep your silver. Rylan pressed the key into her hand, his fingers warm against her cold skin. You will need it for your journey. Before she could protest further, he collected a worn leather satchel from his table and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the handle, looking back at the innkeeper. I would appreciate it if you ensured the lady was not disturbed during her stay, since I paid for the room and all. Then he was gone, slipping out into the storm before anyone could respond. Ghara stood frozen, the key heavy in her palm. The innkeeper looked as if he had swallowed something sour. Room 7, he said through gritted teeth. You heard the man. Top of the stairs, third door on the right. Breakfast is at dawn, but nothing, said a woman who had been sitting near the fire. She was older, with silver hair bound in a neat braid and sharp eyes that missed nothing. If she paid for the room, she gets breakfast same as everyone else. The innkeeper opened his mouth, thought better of whatever he had been about to say, and simply jerked his head toward the stairs. Ghara did not wait for him to change his mind. She climbed the narrow staircase, her legs protesting every step, and found room 7 exactly where Rylan had said it would be. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the rain-soaked road. Ghara locked the door behind her and finally allowed herself to collapse onto the bed. The mattress was stuffed with straw and probably harbored fleas, but it felt like the finest luxury after weeks of sleeping on the hard ground. She lay there listening to the rain and thinking about the quiet man who had given up his shelter for a stranger. For an orc, it made no sense. People did not do such things, not in her experience. There had to be an angle, some ulterior motive she had not yet discerned. But as she drifted toward sleep, warm and dry for the first time in days, she could not bring herself to care what his reasons might have been. She woke to pale morning light filtering through the window and the smell of frying bacon drifting up from below. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since the previous morning. Ghara splashed water on her face from the basin, braided her black hair to keep it from her face, and descended to the common room. The same crowd from the previous night seemed to have been replaced by an equally unwelcoming morning shift. Ghara found an empty table in the corner and sat with her back to the wall, old habits from harder times reasserting themselves. The serving girl, a thin blonde with a nervous disposition, brought her a plate of eggs, bacon, and bread without meeting her eyes. Ghara ate slowly, savoring each bite and trying not to think about how many more hostile inns lay between her and the coast. She was mopping up the last of her eggs with a piece of bread when the door opened and Rylan walked in. He looked like he had spent the night outside. His hair was damp, his clothes rumpled, and there were shadows under his eyes that had not been there before. He saw Ghara and nodded, a brief acknowledgement before heading to the bar. The innkeeper served him without comment, and Rylan took his mug of what smelled like weak ale to a table near the window. Ghara watched him for a moment, wrestling with herself. Then she stood and crossed to his table. You slept outside. Rylan looked up from his mug. Good morning to you as well. It was raining. I noticed. There was no accusation in his voice, no resentment, just a statement of fact. You did not have to do that, Ghara said. Give me your room. No, I did not have to. Rylan took a sip of his ale. But I did. Why? He was quiet for a long moment, turning the mug in his hands. Do I need a reason? In my experience, yes. People always have reasons. Maybe I just did not like seeing a pregnant woman turned out into a storm. He met her eyes and she saw nothing there but honest simplicity. Maybe it is as uncomplicated as that. Ghara did not know what to say. She stood there feeling foolish, aware that other patrons were watching their exchange with open curiosity. Where did you sleep? The stable was dry enough. I have slept in worse places. Rylan gestured to the empty chair across from him. Would you like to sit? You look like standing is taking effort. It was true. Her back ached and her feet were swollen. Ghara lowered herself into the chair, grateful for the support. I am Ghara. Rylan. Rylan Irvin. Where were you heading before you gave up your room? Nowhere in particular, Rylan said. I do seasonal work, farm labor mostly. Right now I am between jobs, just traveling to see where I end up. That sounds lonely. Sometimes, he shrugged. Sometimes it is peaceful. What about you? Where are you headed? Ghara hesitated. She had learned not to share too much with strangers, but something about Rylan's quiet manner made her want to trust him. The coast. I have a cousin there who has offered me a place to stay. That is a long journey for someone in your condition. I had no choice. The words came out more bitter than she had intended. My clan. They did not approve of certain decisions I made. Rylan's gaze flickered to her belly, understanding dawning in his eyes. The father. Human, Ghara said flatly. A merchant who passed through our territory. He told me he loved me, that he would take me with him when his business was concluded. Instead, he left in the middle of the night without a word. She laughed, a harsh sound. I was a fool. You were trusting, Rylan corrected. That is not the same thing. It feels the same. They sat in silence for a moment. The serving girl brought Rylan a plate of food, setting it down quickly and scurrying away as if afraid Ghara might bite her. Rylan pushed the plate toward the center of the table. Have you eaten enough? Growing babies need plenty of food. I ate, Ghara said, but her stomach betrayed her with a low rumble. Rylan raised an eyebrow and pushed the plate closer. With a sigh, Ghara took a piece of bacon. You are very presumptuous. I have been called worse. Rylan started eating, his movements economical and unhurried. How far to the coast from here? 2 weeks if the weather holds and I can keep a steady pace. Longer in my current state. The roads are not safe for solo travel, especially this far from the settlements. Ghara bristled. I can take care of myself. I am sure you can. But there are bandits on the northern road, and the river crossings are treacherous this time of year. Rylan took another bite of his food, chewing thoughtfully. You would make better time with a companion. It took Ghara a moment to understand what he was suggesting. When she did, she nearly choked on her bacon. You cannot be serious. Why not? Because you do not know me, because I am an orc. Because, she gestured helplessly, unable to articulate all the reasons why his offer made no sense. I am traveling anyway, Rylan said. I might as well be useful. What do you want in return? His expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. Nothing. I want nothing in return. Nobody does something for nothing. Then maybe I am nobody. Rylan finished his ale and stood. Think about it. I will be leaving after breakfast. If you want company on the road, you are welcome to join me. If not, I wish you safe travels. He collected his satchel and headed for the door. Ghara sat at the table, her mind spinning. Every instinct told her this was a trap, that no human would help an orc without expecting something in return. But another part of her, the part that was bone-tired and afraid and so very alone, wanted desperately to believe that Rylan might be exactly what he appeared to be, a kind man with no ulterior motive. She stood and followed him outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet earth. Rylan was adjusting the straps on his pack, preparing for travel. He looked up when Ghara approached. "I am slow," she warned, "and I need to rest frequently." "That is fine. And I do not need protection. I can handle myself if we run into trouble. I believe you. And if you try anything, Ghara." Rylan's voice was gentle but firm. "I am not him. I am not the merchant who lied to you. I am just a man who thinks the road is easier with company. That is all." She wanted to argue, to find some flaw in his reasoning that would justify her suspicion. But she was tired of being suspicious, tired of facing every day as if it were a battle. "All right," she said finally. "We can travel together." Rylan smiled, a small expression that transformed his serious face. "Good. Let us make some miles while the weather holds." They walked through the morning and into the afternoon, following the northern road as it wound through farmland and forest. Rylan kept an easy pace, never pushing ahead or showing impatience when Ghara needed to stop and rest. He pointed out landmarks, shared water from his canteen, and told stories about the various places he had worked. "I spent a summer in the grain country," he said as they paused beside a stream, "harvesting wheat under a sun that felt like it was trying to burn a hole through your skull. The farmer's wife made the best bread I have ever tasted, though. She would bake fresh loaves every morning, and the smell would drift across the fields." Ghara lowered herself onto a fallen log, grateful for the chance to sit. "Do you miss it, having a steady place?" Rylan considered the question. "Sometimes. There is comfort in routine, in knowing what each day will bring, but there is freedom in moving too. Every town is a chance to start fresh, to be someone new." "Is that what you are running from? Your old self?" He looked at her with those river stone eyes, and for a moment she thought he might actually answer. Then he smiled and shook his head. "We should keep moving. I want to make it to the way station before dark." They reached the way station as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was a simple structure, just a covered platform with benches and a well, but it offered shelter from the elements. Rylan gathered wood for a fire while Ghara unpacked the provisions she had been carrying. "I have dried meat and hard cheese," she said. "Not much, but it will do." "I have potatoes and onions," Rylan said, returning with an armload of wood. "We can make a decent meal if we pool our resources." They cooked together in companionable silence, Rylan tending the fire while Ghara prepared the food. It felt strange and oddly domestic, this simple act of sharing a meal with someone who asked nothing of her. When the food was ready, they ate sitting side by side on one of the benches, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Tell me about your cousin," Rylan said. "The one on the coast. Her name is Mara. She is my mother's sister's daughter. We grew up together before she left the clan to seek her fortune elsewhere." Ghara stared into the fire. "She married a shipbuilder, a human man who did not care what people thought. They have a good life, from what I hear. 3 children and a house with a view of the ocean. That sounds nice." "It does it not? A place where I can raise my child without fear of being cast out or worse." Ghara placed a hand on her belly. "I want my baby to know stability, safety. I do not want them to grow up feeling like they have to apologize for existing." "No child should have to feel that way," Rylan said quietly. They settled in for the night, Rylan giving Ghara his bedroll and taking only a thin blanket for himself. Ghara protested, but he insisted, and she was too tired to argue effectively. She lay down, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of night birds calling, and felt something inside her chest loosen just a little. Maybe the world was not entirely cruel. Maybe there were still kind people in it, people like Rylan who helped without asking for anything in return. The thought was dangerous, offering a hope she could not afford. But as she drifted toward sleep, she allowed herself to hold on to it just for tonight. They traveled together for 3 days, falling into an easy rhythm. Rylan proved to be a considerate companion, always aware of Ghara's limitations without making her feel like a burden. He would suggest rest stops before she had to ask, shared his food without fanfare, and filled the long hours of walking with stories that made her laugh. On the afternoon of the 4th day, they crested a hill and saw smoke rising in the distance. Not the friendly smoke of cook fires, but great black plumes that spoke of destruction. Rylan went still, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. "Bandits," he said. "They must have hit the village." Ghara felt her heart sink. The village of Millbrook was supposed to be their next stop, a place where they could resupply and rest properly before continuing to the coast. "Should we go around? The nearest alternative is 2 days out of our way." Rylan studied the smoke, his expression troubled. "We need to at least investigate. There might be survivors who need help." They approached the village cautiously, ready for danger. What they found was devastation. Houses burned, livestock slaughtered, possessions scattered across the muddy streets. Bodies lay where they had fallen, men and women and children who had been cut down without mercy. Ghara felt bile rise in her throat. She had seen death before, had lived through clan raids and territorial disputes, but this casual brutality sickened her. Rylan moved through the ruins with grim efficiency, checking for survivors. He found an old woman trapped beneath a collapsed beam and gently freed her, carrying her to a spot of clear ground. "The bandits," the woman gasped, her breathing labored. "They came at dawn, demanded everything. When we refused, they—" She broke down sobbing, unable to continue. "How many were there?" Rylan asked, his voice gentle but urgent. 20, maybe more. They rode south after they finished." The woman grabbed Rylan's arm. "They took the children. Said they would sell them to slavers in the border towns." Ghara saw Rylan's jaw tighten. "How long ago?" "An hour, maybe 2. Rylan stood, his expression harder than Ghara had ever seen it. "I need to go after them." "That is suicide," Ghara said. "You are one man against 20 bandits. I cannot just leave those children to that fate. You can and you will, because getting yourself killed will not save anyone." Ghara moved to stand in front of him. "You are a good man, Rylan, but you are not invincible. I have to try." There was such conviction in his voice, such absolute certainty, that Ghara understood this was not a debate she could win with words. She thought of her own child, the life growing inside her, and what she would want someone to do if they were the one being carried off by bandits. "Then I am coming with you," she said. "Absolutely not. You are pregnant. I am also armed and capable." Ghara pulled back her cloak to reveal the short sword belted at her hip. "I fought in clan wars before I even knew what pregnancy was. I can handle a few human bandits." "Ghara, we are wasting time arguing." She turned to the old woman. "Is there anyone else who can help? Any men who survived?" The woman shook her head. "They killed all the men first. The cowards." Rylan looked torn, clearly wanting to protect Ghara but also knowing they could not afford to wait. Finally, he nodded. "Stay behind me. If things go badly, you run. Promise me." "I promise nothing," Ghara said, "but I will be careful." They followed the bandits' trail south, moving as quickly as Ghara's condition would allow. The tracks were easy to follow, a group that size making no effort to hide their passage. After an hour of hard travel, they spotted the bandits' camp in a clearing beside the river. The bandits had stopped to rest, confident in their safety. They sat around a large fire, drinking and laughing while the captive children huddled together in a makeshift pen of rope and stakes. Ghara counted 15 men, all armed with swords or axes, not impossible odds but far from good ones. "We need a plan," Rylan whispered. "Something that gets the children out without getting everyone killed." Ghara studied the camp, her tactical mind cataloging details. The bandits had posted no guards, too arrogant or too drunk to consider the possibility of pursuit. The children were on the far side of the camp, away from the main group. If they could create a distraction. "I have an idea," she said, "but you are not going to like it," she explained quickly, and Ryland's expression grew increasingly troubled as he listened. "That is too dangerous." "It is the only way. We do not have the numbers for a direct assault, which means we need to divide their attention." Ghara checked her sword, making sure it would draw cleanly. "I can handle myself." "I know you can. That is not the point." "Then what is the point?" Rylan was quiet for a moment. Then he said very softly, "I do not want you to get hurt." The simple honesty of it struck Ghara harder than any declaration of affection could have. She reached out and squeezed his hand. "I will be fine. Just make sure you get those children out." Before Rylan could argue further, Ghara strode into the camp. Her appearance had the desired effect. The bandits jumped to their feet, hands moving to weapons as they stared at the pregnant orc walking boldly toward their fire. "Gentlemen," Ghara said, pitching her voice to Carrie, "I am looking for directions to Millbrook. Can any of you help me?" The bandits exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to respond to this bizarre situation. Their leader, a scarred man with a shaved head and cruel eyes, stepped forward. "You are either very brave or very stupid walking into our camp like this. Perhaps a bit of both." Ghara kept her posture relaxed, unthreatening. "I did not realize this was your camp. I saw the fire and hoped for friendly travelers." "Friendly?" The leader laughed, a harsh sound. "Do we look friendly to you, orc? Appearances can be deceiving." Ghara let her gaze drift to the children, saw their terrified faces. "Those are some quiet children you have there, very well behaved. They are cargo, not children, and none of your concern." The leader moved closer, looking Ghara up and down with an expression that made her skin crawl. "Though now that you are here, perhaps we can find a use for you. I am sure someone would pay for an orc slave, especially one breeding." Ghara let her hand drift toward her sword. "I would not recommend trying." "Is that a threat?" The leader drew his sword and the other bandits followed suit. "You are outnumbered, orc. Even if you were not heavy with child, you could not fight us all." "Who said I would be fighting alone?" On cue, Rylan appeared from the trees behind the children's pen. He moved with silent efficiency, cutting through the ropes that held the children captive. The bandits were so focused on Ghara that they did not notice until Rylan was already leading the children away into the forest. "Stop them!" The leader roared, but Ghara was already moving. She drew her sword and lunged, forcing the leader to block rather than give chase. The other bandits scattered, some running after Rylan and the children, others turning to face Ghara. The next few minutes were a blur of motion and violence. Ghara fought with the ruthless efficiency her clan had trained into her, using her opponent's assumptions about her pregnancy against them. They expected her to be slow, vulnerable. Instead, she was controlled fury, her blade finding gaps in their defense with lethal precision. She took down 3 men before one managed to land a blow, his sword catching her across the ribs. Pain exploded through her side, but Ghara forced herself to keep moving. She could not afford to stop, not now. Another bandit came at her from the left and she pivoted, driving her sword through his shoulder. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up. Rylan had gotten the children to safety and was now returning, riding one of the bandits' horses and leading 2 others. He crashed through the camp, scattering the remaining bandits and extending a hand to Ghara. "Come on." Ghara grabbed his hand and let him pull her up onto the horse behind him. They galloped away from the camp, the bandits' curses fading behind them. They rode hard for several minutes before Rylan slowed, turning to check that the children were keeping up on the other horses. "Is everyone all right?" he called. The children, 7 of them ranging from perhaps 6 to 12 years old, nodded mutely. They looked terrified but unharmed. Rylan led them back toward Millbrook, taking a longer but safer route that avoided the main road. It was only when they stopped to rest that Rylan noticed the blood seeping through Ghara's cloak. His face went pale. "You are hurt." "It is not deep," Ghara said, though the wound was beginning to throb in earnest. "I have had worse. Let me see." Ghara reluctantly allowed him to examine the cut. It ran along her ribs, perhaps 6 inches long but mercifully shallow. Rylan tore strips from his shirt and bound the wound with careful hands, his touch gentle despite the urgency of the situation. "You should not have fought them," he said as he worked. "Not in your condition. We have been over this. I can take care of myself." "I know. But that does not mean I have to like watching you put yourself in danger." Rylan tied off the bandage and met her eyes. "You scared me." Ghara felt something warm bloom in her chest, an emotion she could not quite name. "You came back for me. You got the children to safety, but you came back." "Of course I did." "Why?" Rylan was quiet for a long moment, his hands still resting on her shoulders. Then he said, "Because the thought of leaving you behind was unbearable. Because somewhere between the inn and here you stopped being a stranger and became someone I care about. A lot." Ghara stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "You barely know me. I know you are brave and strong and kind. I know you make me laugh and that I look forward to each day of travel because I get to spend it with you. I know that the thought of you getting hurt makes me feel like someone is squeezing my heart." Rylan smiled, that small expression that transformed his face. "What else do I need to know?" Ghara wanted to tell him all the reasons this was a bad idea. That she was an orc and he was human, that people like them did not end up together, that she had been hurt before and could not bear to go through it again. But the words would not come. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was awkward and sweet and perfect. Rylan's arms came around her, careful of her injury, and for a moment the rest of the world fell away. There was only this, only them, only the impossible hope that maybe they could make this work. When they finally pulled apart, one of the children made a disgusted noise. "Gross. Adults kissing." The comment broke the tension and they both laughed. Rylan stood and offered Ghara his hand. "We should get these children home. Their families will be worried." They returned to Millbrook as heroes, the children running ahead to tell tales of their rescue. The surviving villagers greeted them with gratitude and tears, offering what little they had in thanks. The old woman Rylan had helped insisted they stay in her house, which had been spared the worst of the fire. "You saved my grandchildren," she said, her eyes wet. "I can never repay you, but please, let me offer what comfort I can." They stayed for 2 days while the village began the painful process of rebuilding. Rylan helped repair damaged structures while Ghara tended to the wounded, her knowledge of field medicine proving invaluable. They worked side by side, and Ghara found herself constantly aware of Rylan's presence, the way he moved, the sound of his voice as he spoke to the villagers. On their last night in Millbrook, they sat together on the porch of the old woman's house, watching the stars. Rylan had his arm around Ghara's shoulders and she leaned into his warmth, feeling safe in a way she had not felt in months. "What happens when we reach the coast?" Rylan asked quietly. "I go to my cousin. She gives me a place to stay. I have my baby and try to build a life." Ghara hesitated. "What about you? Where will you go?" "I have been thinking about that." Rylan's thumb traced small circles on her shoulder. "I could keep traveling, looking for work wherever I can find it, or Or I could stay with you if you would want that. Ghara turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign of doubt or deception. She found only quiet sincerity. You would give up your freedom to stay with an orc and a half-human baby. I would not be giving up anything. I would be gaining everything that matters. Rylan cupped her face with his free hand. I love you, Ghara. I know it is fast and probably foolish, but I cannot help how I feel. These past weeks with you have been the happiest I can remember. The thought of saying goodbye when we reach the coast feels wrong. Impossible. Ghara felt tears prick her eyes. People will talk. They will say terrible things about us. Let them talk. It will not be easy. Nothing worth having ever is, Rylan smiled. I am not afraid of hard work, Ghara, and I am not afraid of loving you. Ghara kissed him again, pouring all her hope and fear and desperate, fragile joy into the press of her lips against his. When they parted, she was crying openly. I love you too. I tried not to, but I do. Why did you try not to? Because I have been hurt before, because I was afraid. Because loving you means trusting you, and trust is terrifying. I will never hurt you, Rylan said fiercely. Not intentionally. Not if I can help it. You and this baby, you are my family now. I will spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me. They held each other as the night deepened around them. Two people from different worlds who had found something precious in the space between. It was not a solution to all their problems. The world would still be cruel, people would still judge them, and their path would be difficult. But they would walk it together, and that made all the difference. They left Millbrook 3 days later, laden with gifts from the grateful villagers. Food, supplies, even a small cart pulled by an old but sturdy mule. For the baby, the old woman insisted, pressing a bundle of soft blankets into Ghara's hands. Every child deserves a proper welcome into the world. The journey to the coast took another week. Ghara's pregnancy was advancing, making travel slower and rest more frequent. Rylan was endlessly patient, never complaining when they had to stop, always ready with a joke or story to lift her spirits. At night they would lie together in their bedroll, Rylan's hand on Ghara's belly feeling the baby kick and move. You think it is a boy or girl? He asked one evening. I do not know. My people do not have ways of telling beforehand. Ghara placed her hand over his. Does it matter to you? Not even a little, as long as they are healthy. What should we name them? Rylan thought for a moment. If it is a girl, maybe Rose. That was my mother's name. Rose. Ghara tested the name, found she liked the sound of it. And if it is a boy, you should choose. This is your child. Our child, Ghara corrected. You said we were family. That makes this baby yours too if you want them. Rylan's eyes grew suspiciously bright. I want them, more than anything. They reached the coast on a clear morning when the sun turned the ocean to liquid gold. Ghara stood at the top of the final hill, staring at the vast expanse of water, and felt something in her chest expand. This was it. The end of her journey and the beginning of a new life. Rylan pointed to a cluster of buildings along the shore. Is that where your cousin lives? It should be. The fishing village of Saltmere. Ghara started down the hill, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. What if Mara had changed her mind? What if she took one look at Rylan and decided Ghara was not welcome after all? But her fears proved groundless. They found Mara's house easily, a sturdy structure with blue shutters and a garden full of herbs. Mara herself answered the door, her face breaking into a wide smile when she saw Ghara. Cousin, she pulled Ghara into a careful hug, mindful of her belly. You made it. I was starting to worry. The journey took longer than expected. Ghara gestured to Rylan, who stood a respectful distance back. This is Rylan Irvin. He is with you, Mara finished, her eyes twinkling. I can see that. Come in, both of you. You must be exhausted." Mara's house was warm and welcoming, filled with the sounds of children playing and the smell of baking bread. Her husband, a gruff but kind man named Thomas, welcomed them without hesitation. The children, 2 boys and a girl, were curious about Ghara's tusks and Rylan's stories in equal measure. That night, after the children were in bed, Mara and Ghara sat together on the porch overlooking the ocean. Rylan had gone with Thomas to check on the boats, giving the cousins time to catch up. "He seems like a good man," Mara said, watching the moonlight play across the waves. "He is. Better than I deserve." "None of that." Mara squeezed Ghara's hand. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." "I am glad you found him." "I did not expect to. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, raising this child and trying to survive." Ghara placed a hand on her belly. "Then Rylan gave me his room key and everything changed. Love has a way of finding us when we least expect it." Mara smiled. "Thomas and I faced similar prejudices when we decided to marry. People said terrible things, called us traitors to our own kinds. But we built a life anyway, and now we have 3 beautiful children and more happiness than I ever thought possible." "Were you afraid?" "Terrified." "But Thomas was worth the fear, just like Rylan is worth it for you." Ghara looked out at the ocean, letting the sound of the waves soothe her. "What if I am not a good mother? What if I cannot protect my child from the cruelty of the world?" "No parent can protect their child from everything. All we can do is love them fiercely and teach them to be strong." Mara leaned her head on Ghara's shoulder. "And you will not be doing it alone. You have me and Thomas and Rylan. We are your family now." The word settled over Ghara like a warm blanket. Family. She had been without one for so long, cast out by her clan and abandoned by the man she had trusted. But now she had Rylan and Mara, and the promise of a future that did not involve running or hiding or being alone. Rylan and Ghara stayed with Mara and Thomas for the next several weeks. Thomas found work for Rylan at the shipyard, and Rylan proved to be a quick learner with a knack for woodworking. Ghara helped Mara with the children and the household, grateful for the chance to rest and prepare for the baby's arrival. As her due date approached, Ghara found herself growing increasingly anxious. She had heard stories of orc births, knew they could be difficult and dangerous. What if something went wrong? What if the baby did not survive, or she did not survive, or both? Rylan seemed to sense her fear. He would hold her at night, his arms wrapped protectively around her swollen belly, and whisper reassurances into her hair. "You are strong. You can do this. I will be right here with you the whole time. You cannot be in the birthing room. It is not done. Then I will be right outside the door, pacing a hole in the floor and driving everyone mad with worry." Rylan kissed her temple. "You are not alone in this, Ghara. Whatever happens, we face it together." The baby came on a stormy night 3 weeks later. Ghara woke to contractions that took her breath away, waves of pain that seemed to split her in two. Mara summoned the village midwife, a capable woman named Agnes, who had delivered more babies than she could count. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Ghara had faced clan warriors and bandits without flinching, but this pain was different, all-consuming, relentless. She gripped Mara's hand hard enough to bruise, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You are doing wonderfully," Agnes said, her voice calm and encouraging. "Just a little more." "I can see the head." Ghara bore down with everything she had, and suddenly the pressure released in a rush. A baby's cry filled the room, strong and healthy and perfect. Agnes cleaned the infant quickly and wrapped them in one of the soft blankets the villagers had given them. "A girl," Agnes announced, placing the baby in Ghara's arms. "A beautiful baby girl." Ghara looked down at her daughter and felt her heart break open. The baby had her green skin and small tusks already visible, but her eyes were brown like her father's and her hair was a soft, dark fuzz. She was perfect, absolutely perfect. Rylan, Ghara said hoarsely. Someone get Rylan. Mara hurried to the door and called for him. Rylan burst into the room moments later, his face wild with worry and hope. He stopped short when he saw Ghara holding the baby, his expression transforming into something Ghara could not quite name. Is she? She is healthy, strong. Ghara held out the baby. Do you want to hold your daughter? Rylan crossed the room on shaking legs and carefully took the infant from Ghara's arms. He stared down at the baby with such naked love that Ghara felt tears spring to her eyes. She is beautiful, perfect, just like her mother. Rose, Ghara said. We should call her Rose like your mother. Rose. Rylan tested the name, and the baby made a small sound as if in approval. Hello, Rose. I am your father, and I promise I will love you and protect you for the rest of my life. Ghara watched Rylan with their daughter and felt a peace settle over her that she had never known before. This was family. This was home. Not a place, but these people. Rylan and Rose and Mara and Thomas and the children. They were her tribe now, the people who would stand with her against whatever the world threw at them. The weeks after Rose's birth passed in a blur of sleepless nights and perfect moments. Rylan proved to be a devoted father, walking Rose around the house when she cried, changing her wrappings without complaint, singing her soft songs in his rumbling voice. Ghara would watch them together and wonder how she had gotten so lucky. One evening, when Rose was about 2 months old, Rylan asked Ghara to walk with him along the beach. They left Rose with Mara and strolled hand in hand along the shore, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. I have been thinking, Rylan said as they walked, about the future, about us. What about us? Rylan stopped and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I want to marry you. I want to stand before whoever will witness it and declare that you are my wife, that Rose is my daughter, that we are a family in every way that matters. Ghara felt her breath catch. Marriage is a human custom. My people do not practice it. Then we will make our own custom, a blending of both our traditions. Rylan squeezed her hands. I know it will not change anything legally. I know people will still judge us, still call our love wrong, but I want you to know that I am committed to you and Rose for the rest of my life. I want everyone to know it. Yes, Ghara said, surprised by how easily the word came. Yes, I will marry you. Rylan let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her with such tenderness that Ghara felt tears slip down her cheeks. I love you, he said against her lips. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, more than I have words for. They planned a small ceremony for the following month to be held on the beach at sunset. Mara threw herself into the preparations with enthusiasm, helping Ghara sew a dress from fabric the color of the ocean. Thomas built an arch of driftwood and fishing nets, decorated with shells and wildflowers. The day of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful. Ghara dressed in her new gown, her black hair braided with ribbons, and felt more nervous than she had facing down an army of bandits. What if she said the wrong thing? What if she tripped walking down the makeshift aisle? But when she saw Rylan waiting for her under the arch, all her nervousness melted away. He wore his best clothes, his dark hair neatly combed, and the look on his face when he saw her made her feel like the most beautiful creature in the world. They had asked the village priest to officiate, a kind old man who had agreed despite his initial reservations about joining a human and an orc in marriage. He spoke words about love and commitment, about two souls becoming one. Ghara barely heard them, too focused on Rylan's hands holding hers, his eyes never leaving her face. When it came time to exchange vows, Rylan spoke first. "Ghara, from the moment I saw you standing in that inn, cold and alone and so very proud, I knew you were someone special. You have shown me what it means to be truly brave, to face a hostile world with your head held high. You have given me a family, a purpose, a reason to be better than I was. I promise to love you, to protect you, to stand by your side through whatever comes. You are my heart, my home, my everything." Ghara had to wipe away tears before she could speak. "Rylan, you gave me your room key and changed the course of my life. You showed me that kindness still exists, that not all people are cruel, that I was worth saving. You have loved my daughter as if she were your own blood, and you have loved me even when I could not love myself. I promise to trust you, to build a life with you, to face each day knowing I am not alone. You are my anchor, my safe harbor, my heart's true home." The priest declared them married, and Rylan kissed her to the cheers of their small gathering. Mara and Thomas and the children, Agnes the midwife, a handful of villagers who had come to accept this unusual family. It was not a large wedding, but it was perfect. That night, after the celebration had ended and Rose was asleep in her cradle, Ghara and Rylan lay together in the small cottage Thomas had helped them build. It was simple, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was theirs. Their home. "Are you happy?" Rylan asked, stroking Ghara's hair. "Happier than I ever thought I could be." Ghara traced patterns on his chest. "Sometimes I wake up and think this is all a dream, that I will open my eyes and be back in that inn, being turned away into the rain. This is real. I am real." Rylan took her hand and pressed it over his heart. "Feel that? I am here and I am not going anywhere." Ghara felt the steady beat beneath her palm and knew it was true. This was her life now. Not perfect, not easy, but real and solid and full of love. She had a home, a family, a future that stretched out bright and promising before her. The years that followed brought challenges, of course. There were people in the village who never accepted them, who whispered cruel things and made their children stay away from Rose. There were hard winters when work was scarce and money tight. There were moments of doubt and fear and exhaustion. But there was also joy, so much joy. Rose grew into a bright, curious child with Ghara's strength and Rylan's gentle nature. She learned to swim in the ocean and help her father at the shipyard. She called Rylan Papa and Ghara Mama, and never seemed to notice that she looked different from other children. 2 years after Rose was born, Ghara found herself pregnant again. This time there was no fear, no uncertainty, just excitement and anticipation. Rylan was beside himself with happiness, already planning how to expand their cottage to accommodate another child. The second baby, a boy they named Rowan, came easily. He had Rylan's brown eyes and Ghara's green skin, a perfect blend of both his parents. Rose was fascinated by her baby brother, always wanting to help feed him or rock him to sleep. Ghara would watch her family sometimes and marvel at how far she had come. From that pregnant orc being turned away in the rain to this, a mother of 2 with a husband who loved her and a home that felt safe. It was more than she had ever dared to dream. One evening, when Rose was 5 and Rowan was 3, the family gathered on the beach to watch the sunset. It had become their tradition, this quiet time together at the end of the day. Rose was building elaborate sand castles while Rowan tried to knock them down, both children shrieking with laughter. Rylan sat with his arm around Ghara, watching their children play. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. Choosing this life, dealing with all the stares and whispers, Ghara thought about the question seriously before answering. "No, never. This life is hard sometimes, but it is ours. We built it together and that makes all the difference." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "What about you? Do you regret giving your room to a stranger that rainy night? That was the best decision I ever made. Rylan kissed the top of her head. It brought me you. It brought me our family. How could I regret that? Rose ran up to them, her hands full of shells. Mama, Papa, look what I found. Can we bring them home? Of course, little one. Ghara took the shells and admired them dutifully. They are beautiful. Rose beamed and ran back to show Rowan her treasures. Ghara watched her go, this fierce, loving child who existed because a quiet man had shown kindness to a stranger. Because Rylan had seen past her green skin and tusks to the person beneath. Because they had both been brave enough to love despite the world telling them they should not. Tell me again, Ghara said, snuggling closer to Rylan. About the night we met. Rylan smiled, the expression she had come to treasure. It was raining so hard you could barely see 3 feet ahead. And there was this proud, beautiful orc standing in the common room, refusing to beg even though she was clearly desperate. The innkeeper was being a complete fool, turning her away into the storm. And I thought, I cannot let that happen. I cannot just sit here and do nothing. So you gave me your room key. So I gave you my room key. Rylan pulled her closer. And you changed my life. We changed each other's lives. Yes, we did. They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in impossible colors. Their children played nearby, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Somewhere in the village, people were probably still talking about them, still judging their union. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was the feel of Rylan's arms around her. The sound of her children's joy. The solid weight of a life built on love and trust, and the courage to believe that 2 people from different worlds could create something beautiful together. Ghara thought back to that rainy night at the inn, when she had been so desperate and alone. She thought about the man who had stood up and offered her not just shelter, but hope. She thought about all the moments since then, the laughter and tears and everything in between. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Rylan started to hum a lullaby. Rowan climbed into Ghara's lap, tired from playing, and Rose settled against Rylan's side. They sat together, this impossible family, and watched the night come alive with possibilities. I love you, Ghara said, the words she had said 1,000 times and would say 1,000 more. I love you too, Rylan replied. Always. The ocean waves rolled in and out, eternal and unchanging. But their lives had changed completely, transformed by a single act of kindness on a rainy night. Ghara held her son close and felt her husband's warmth beside her and watched her daughter chase fireflies along the beach. This was happiness. This was home. This was everything she had never known she needed until a quiet man had handed her a room key and given her the courage to believe in something better. The future stretched out before them, full of challenges and joys yet to come. But whatever happened, they would face it together. And that made all the difference in the world.